Who woke up excited to hear about financial trauma this morning? Man, bringing the energy for a difficult topic, right?
Yes.
I mean, we're going to talk about some serious stuff today, and we hope that you'll take care of yourself. If you hear something that's overwhelming for yourself, just take a breath, step out if you need to. But we really want to make this a safe and approachable place to talk about our real lived experiences with financial trauma, the way it's impacted our lives. Because we know in this community that pretty much everyone has some form of financial trauma in their background. So at the end of the panel discussion, we're going to open up the floor for you to respond and engage with us about your questions as content creators. How do you engage the topic of financial trauma? We'll try to help you out with that. And if you have ideas on how you've effectively engaged it in your own communities, we'd love to hear that as well. So my name is Ed Coambs. I'm a marriage and family therapist that specializes in financial therapy with couples. I'm an author of an award-winning book, The Healthy Love and Money Way. And I'm the president-elect for the Financial Therapy Association, a group of people that are mental health professionals and financial planners looking to integrate the fields of mental health and financial planning together. Adrienne?
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Adrienne. I am an accredited financial counselor. I'm also the founder of Tailored Wealth Saver. We have a podcast that was nominated as a finalist yesterday called, thank you, called the Wealth Saver Podcast, so check us out. What we do, we focus on millennials, helping them to build wealth and emphasis on enjoying life at the same time. And we'll talk about that, why the emphasis is on also enjoying life. But that's a little bit about myself. I also work with the Department of Defense and teach military financial education. And now I have the great Rahkim next to me.
Rahkim Sabree here, author, columnist, financial coach, and speaker, and my focus is addressing financial trauma as a barrier between financial literacy and financial empowerment. Super excited to be here today. And I'm introducing Suni.
Hello. I'm Suni. I am the co-host of the Invest Anywhere series on the Afford Anything podcast and the chief sanity officer at Afford Anything, where I take care of all of the back-end ops of the brand as a whole. It's kind of my dream job. I'm super stoked. I'm also a real estate investor. I am a former professional tennis player and an Olympian. I am.
Wait, what? Holding out on us.
Our meetings were a little short.
She's laying it on, guys.
I'm a sixth grade dropout who graduated from a top 10 MBA program with honors. And I am a card-carrying survivor of the corporate finance industry, where I survived several super difficult years talking to global execs in different industries about money. So I'm a lot of these things in part because of my financial trauma. So I grew up in a home that was ruled by domestic violence. I witnessed first financial abuse and the associated traumas, and then actually experienced it firsthand myself. And so that is why, even though my professional experiences may not fully tailor to financial trauma like some of my amazing panelists, that's why I'm here to talk to you guys today with them. So now that you've learned a little bit about us and why we're here, it's probably a good idea to kind of get an idea of what financial trauma is so that we are all kind of operating from the same mental baseline. We all have an understanding of where we're coming from when we talk about it. So financial trauma is a dynamic that takes place at the intersection of personal finance and mental health / emotional psychological trauma. Usually I'd have to think through how to tailor the message of personal finance to any room, but I think we can skip that today, right? So that takes us to our second part, which is the mental health and trauma piece. So trauma is an emotional response to a distressing experience. And this emotional response involves just like a really complicated depletion of our abilities. And when I say abilities can mean so many different things. It presents itself as so many different things. But a few examples include a depletion of like our emotional abilities, our abilities to process and regulate our own emotions without kind of sometimes being stuck in like that feedback loop, you know? It can involve a depletion of our social abilities, our abilities to make good relationships, and we all know how important that is. And it can involve a depletion of our abilities to make good judgments, that those are our cognitive abilities. And so when we think about financial trauma, it is a depletion of these abilities. It is this emotional response to how we view and our relationship with money. And now that that fun part's out of the way, I think it's time to turn it over to my amazing panelists and start getting some more deeper insight into their experiences and the insight that they have. So, Rahkim,
Yes.
what is your process or approach for overcoming financial trauma?
Yes, so I've coined the 3 E's. And the 3 E's are exposure, education, and execution. And so I love that you introduced kind of your background and how that has influenced your presence in this space, because my background has influenced my presence in this space as well. So I grew up, and I share this story all the time, experiencing aspects of poverty. My parents were teenagers when I was born. And so they did all that they could to provide for me and my siblings. And then when they separated, it kind of created a very traumatic schism, which I think is a relatable experience. In that, I became an administrative kind of role in the household when it came to managing the household finances, which included navigating food stamps, navigating Section 8. And so because that was my reality in that moment, I then, and I go on to say this in a TED Talk that I did, aspired to be poor. So I want to take a second to let that sink in, right? What does that mean? It doesn't mean that I wanted to grow up and experience poverty, but it meant that because that was my experience through proximity, that's what I looked to do when I was going to go out and be on my own. I wanted to have food stamps for myself. I wanted to have Section 8 for myself because that's what my mom did to survive. And so it didn't occur to me until I got into an environment, exposure, where other people within my age group owned property, that I could say, oh, I could own property. And so then that exposure grew into, well, how can I own property? Education. And so I go and I learn what is involved, how much money do I need, what does my credit score need to be, who do I need to talk to? And eventually, when I got into the process of purchasing a home, the what if questions started to surface. What if the roof needs to be replaced? What if the furnace goes out? What if? And because I didn't have the financial backing that my peer did, that execution piece, which I believe is arguably the hardest part, became very crucial, because even though I had everything lined up, I had the education, I had the exposure, I still had to make the decision to move forward in purchasing property. So I'm proud to say that at 26 years old, I was able to buy a multifamily home. I moved through that trauma through this process that I'm sharing with you guys today. And so when I work with clients, it's very much mirroring my experience. I think the interesting thing about this space is that there's a clash, and we'll explore this a little bit more when we invite you guys to share with us, between the academics who read and learn and teach on this topic and the practitioners who are actually out doing the work. So I'm gonna pause here and I'm going to ask the first question of our panel. Ed, how did you end up committing financial infidelity with your wife?
Oh, the cat's out of the bag, isn't it? I know, I'm looking in the audience and I'm thinking, man, you guys thought I was pretty good, didn't you? You hadn't read my book yet, though. So, financial infidelity is a huge topic in our society, and it stems from an inability to experience financial intimacy. And financial intimacy goes well beyond just knowing the numbers, but really knowing your partner's heart and mind and soul, and being able to meet them and show up with them in their experiences of being in the intimate relationship with you as you navigate your finances. So that's a mouthful, right? I left professional firefighting, my dream job as a child. I thought I was going to be getting to ride in a red fire truck down the street and save the day and be a hero. Every little boy's dream, or many little boys' dreams. I started my career July 2001. We know what happened 2 months later. One of the greatest tragedies of our nation. As a young firefighter, I was not in New York. I was in Houston, Texas. But the community of firefighters is so deeply knit that that was my first major adult trauma. It was setting the stage for layers of insecurity I had yet to be able to understand. Fast forward, I meet the woman of my dreams 2 days before my closest friend from the fire academy committed suicide. This friend had taken me in after moving from California to Houston. He grew up in a more affluent family than mine. As someone with financial aspirations, that was part of my strategy informally, was to meet people that had more money than me to figure out how to get there, because for most of us, starting wherever we're at on that financial line, we look up and we're like, how do you get there? And meeting people was one of my strategies. So that loss was a big one that I couldn't wrap my head around as a firefighter. In meeting my wife, she was finishing dental school. A lot of what we talk about is the journey of crossing social class, which is its own form of psychological transformation and trauma. Is our identity and who we are is based in the class that we grow up in initially. And so as we're trying to transition, our sense of self is having to work very hard to navigate between where we've been and where we're trying to get to. And it's a form of culture to translate across. There's not a lot of support to understand this cultural migration from one class to the next. So this is setting the backdrop. My father was an electrician. My mother was a teacher's aide. They had some college, right? So this is all backdrop. My wife grew up, her father had completed college. Her mom completed college. She was expected to go to college. She was expected to be a doctor. That was congruent for her. We got married. Well, you're saying, Ed, you got to marry a doctor. Aren't you lucky? I heard that all the time. And yes, I am lucky. And yes, my values are that women should be as highly educated and making as much money as men, if not more. But something inside of me felt deeply insecure by that. And I was confused because I thought the path to feeling more secure was to get more education. So I started on the path of getting a CFP, getting my MBA, trying to feel equal with my wife. My wife would tell me, I don't care about that crap. I love you for who you are. It could not get through my thick head that that was true. So I go back to school after getting my MBA and my CFP to get a counseling degree because they know how people work, I think. I didn't really understand what a mental health professional did, but in that journey, I started to be confronted with all kinds of questions about how do humans grow and develop? What is mental health? Most of those questions I didn't really want to confront while I was in grad school because it was just trying to get through the school. I leave grad school. I'm now supposed to be a therapist that specializes in financial therapy, and I have no idea what the hell that means. So I have a duplicity that's growing inside of me because I'm trying to say I'm doing one thing, but I really have no idea what the hell I actually mean. You try to grow a business that way, how hard is it? My wife is growing her practice, becoming more and more financially successful, and I'm wondering, where am I in this? Externally, we look great. Internally, I feel like shit. The credit card bills start to build because I'm trying to grow this business. I'm now so embarrassed and so deep in shame about, I can't get this together. I have all this education. What's wrong with me? Leads me into this deep crisis of unfolding over 4 years. And ultimately, it comes out, I have the credit card debt. My wife is like, what? What is going on? I thought, I'm dumbfounded by it all as well. It takes a few years. There's an NPR article, you can search it out there as part of this coming out process. But when we're thinking about financial infidelity, it's so much more than the act of financial infidelity. It's this long journey of who we are and where we're at in our stage of development and growth that we're trying to overcome in that process. And so the space of therapy and hopefully more and more financial therapy will give peace and a place of refuge for people to reflect on, who am I with money? How have I gotten here? How do I deal with the different thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, relationship dynamics that I have going on that are shaping the way I'm showing up around my finances? How can I get myself back to a place of integrity from leaving that place of integrity that most of us value so deeply, right? We don't want to have to confront that duplicity that we're often living with, but it's a necessary journey to really experience financial freedom. It's not just getting to the number mark, which is what so many people believe, is if I just get to this number, then I'll feel financially free. But without the psychological freedom, the financial freedom doesn't matter. So on that note, I'm going to turn over to Rahkim to ask the next question.
You dropped some heavy bombs on us with that. And I think a lot of the people in this room can relate to a lot of the different things that you touched on. And what stood out to me in particular as we kind of talk about the differences between our stories is that whole idea around, navigating the social classes and what that looks like, right, in terms of presenting. Me talking about experiencing poverty and then moving into a space where now my entire paradigm around what is possible changes. So I appreciate that, and I'm hoping that you guys are taking some of these stories and starting to craft in your mind what are traumas that maybe you navigate or maybe you help your clients navigate when it comes to the creation of content and whatever medium that takes, but also in the practitioner's perspective. So Adrienne, your question, when did you recognize your financial trauma?
So my financial trauma started, actually, we have to go back about 10 years so I can explain to you my financial trauma. So one of the things I talk about on my platform a lot is it's okay wherever you are starting with your financial journey. When I graduated college, background is in economics, that's what my degree is in, so realized like, hey, I'm gonna have this great paying job, all these wonderful things. I deserve to take a vacation after graduating college because I'm gonna enjoy life, which is what we focus on, and do all these things. I studied hard, everything of that sort. But enjoying life, I forgot to also add in a spending plan and managing my finances. Like that part just went over my head. It was just the enjoying life aspect. And from that, I wound up getting myself into over $30,000 in credit card debt. Now that credit card debt, I knew every single month getting a statement, you're in debt. They send you a statement every single month, you're in debt. Didn't click. It finally clicked to me that I was in debt when I could not go home to Indianapolis for Christmas, because Christmas it doesn't just pop up out of anywhere. Like you can plan for Christmas. It's the same time of the year, every single year.
I heard they were trying to move it, actually. Yeah.
And I couldn't go home for Christmas without putting it on a credit card that I had no idea how I was gonna pay for this plane ticket. And that was my aha moment, like, you're in debt, Adrienne, duh, wake up. So because of that, because of my background in finance, I started focusing a lot on paying off the card. Now rewind that 5 years before that, it was about 2006, 2008 timeframe, Great Recession. My mother lost her job, and so in high school, she was a single parent. I grew up with her as a single parent, and to me, she's one of the smartest women. She's an engineer. I just always said my mother's one of the smartest women. I wanted to be like her. But when she lost her job, it wasn't like 5 months she lost her job, 6 months, a year. It was about a year and a half she didn't have employment as a single parent. And granted, she was receiving child support, but that's not enough to take care of herself, me, and our household. So I started working, and that instilled in me what I didn't realize, a scarcity mindset. So when I finally realized, like, you're in debt, Adrienne, duh, I had the scarcity mindset. And it came down to, at one point, I became so focused on paying off this credit card, which was great. I'm like, hey, I have discipline, I'm paying off this card. But reality was, I would get paid, and I would either decide 3 times, I remember this so specifically, I decided, am I going to pay off this credit card, or am I going to pay for me to have food to eat? And I chose, because of the scarcity mindset, I'm going to pay off this card instead of actually eating. 3 times I remember saying that. I did not eat, and I paid off this credit card because I felt like me paying off that card would allow me, if I would ever lose my job like my mom, I would be okay. So I had the scarcity mindset. So fast forward, I'm a credit financial counselor. This is what I do. I counsel people, have all this theoretical and practical experience with it. But it wasn't until I was actually on Facebook during the pandemic in March 2020, and I ran across this account called Modem Solution with Dr. Michael Thomas. He teaches at the University of Georgia. And he started talking about financial trauma. And that's when it clicked to me that me paying off that card, deciding to pay off a card vice eating, wasn't really because of the scarcity mindset, which it is, it's part of that, but it's also because of that trauma I experienced as a child when my mother lost her job, and I had to we figured out how we're gonna make ends meet. So that was my experience with the financial trauma, but I went through it and I didn't know it was trauma. So all this time, even when I started the business, I started realizing, because I got into a depression, like I was not eating 3 nights. I did not eat, like nothing. And I'm not really, like, I don't have a lot of room not to eat. Well, I do now, but back then I didn't have nearly as much room not to eat. So I went through that, and it made me realize, like, you really have this trauma that's been affecting you this whole time. It explains why I went through a period of depression. It explains why I'm great with saving. I can save money. I can teach you how to save money all day. But I didn't really have that emphasis also enjoying life. I didn't know that balance because I wasn't addressing those traumas that I was facing from that stemmed all the way back from my childhood. And now I'm in my 30s trying to deal with them. It's just like, how do I do this? So that's why we focus a lot with Taylor Well Saver. We focus on enjoying life plus building wealth, because you need to have that balance of both. But if you don't address those traumas that you have, the mental mindset or the money mindset you have, honestly, none of it really matters, because you're still at the end of the day going to end up back to where you were. So that's why I say that's when I figured out my financial trauma. It wasn't until all this time later that I realized you were actually going through financial trauma. Even though you have the training, you didn't recognize it in your own self.
And I think that that's such a valuable point, right? It's inherent in the nature of trauma for most types leads us into extremes of either chaos or rigidity. And so part of overall well-being, and specifically as we're thinking about financial well-being, is finding that balance, right? And that's, as financial planners and financial educators, that's often what we're trying to inherently teach folks, and we get really confused and frustrated when we're trying to show them that, but they are continuing to live in a rigid way or a chaotic way with their finances. And so if they're living in either end of the extreme, then we need to be cognizant that likely there's some financial trauma in the past that may be blocking them from finding that balanced middle way in navigating their financial life.
Great point. Adrienne, you said a term a couple of times that I'm sure we've all heard before, but I don't know that everybody knows what it means, and that was the scarcity mindset. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that for the sake of the audience?
Absolutely. So a scarcity mindset, usually you have 2 types of mindset, an abundance mindset or a scarcity mindset. So on our platform, I'm not trying to keep mentioning our platform, we don't talk about budgeting. I don't mention the word budget. Or if I do, it's only to relate so people know what I mean. But we mention spending plans. And the reason why we say a spending plan is because that's a mindset of abundance. You're directing how you want to spend your money. When you're budgeting, this is all I have. Like, it's a scarcity mindset. I have to do this, 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 and this. This is all I have. At the end of the day, a spending plan and a budget is the same thing, but it's the outlook that you have. Do you have a mindset of scarcity, which a lot of us, if we grew up in poverty or went through a situation that placed us in being in a situation of poverty, then you might have that scarcity mindset. Like, you have to save, grab as much as you can, instead of a mindset of abundance, to where you are directing where things go. You're investing your money. You're giving freely, or not freely, but within limits. But you're giving, and you're not necessarily just thinking with a scarcity or a mindset with a lack without having as much. So that's kind of the difference between the two, and really focus on having that mindset of abundance. You use the words budget, that's fine. We just don't use it. We use spending plan because we want to direct how we're going to spend our money, not money is directing us how to spend it. Like, you don't work for money, money works for you at the end of the day.
Suni, can you talk us through a broader conversation on how financial trauma presents itself?
Yes. But first, okay, real talk. So anyone that's been around me in like the last 24 hours knows like how wildly anxious I was about this. And I'm sharing like basically a really small piece of my trauma. And as I'm sitting here listening to my fellow panelists, like I am just blown away by how courageous they are. I'm in awe at how much bravery they've shown. So before I keep talking, can we please give them a round of applause? Okay. So zooming back out, financial trauma, how it presents itself. When we started this conversation, we kind of talked about like the definition, how financial trauma is basically a trauma, emotional, psychological trauma response, and it very much presents itself in the same way. So when we think about trauma, there are behaviors and reactions that kind of come to mind, right? So there's the anxiety, there is hypervigilance, there is detachment, there are panic attacks, there are like a whole host of behaviors. But then I think we need to think about, okay, so how do these reactions relate to how financial behaviors kind of come to play? Some of which Adrienne talked about briefly. So like anxiety, hypervigilance can lead to a scarcity mindset. I know that it certainly did with me, with all the experiences that I had been through. The idea of money and not having enough was just so terrifying, because to me that presented a lack of options for myself and for those I cared about. So that was why I chased achievements like no other, because the money would follow. On the other end of the spectrum can be detachment. So this can also present in a wide variety of behaviors, which makes this really hard, right? So like with detachment, you can see erratic spending, you can see lavish spending, or you can see just like a total avoidance of money management. So when we talk about finances, it's really important to understand financial trauma and the behaviors that can drive monetary decisions. We talk a lot about budgeting and these different buzzwords, but that's just frankly not enough, because the implication can be that the problem is like a poor prioritization on the part of the person making these decisions. And that's not necessarily what is happening. And to be totally honest, if we are reducing the conversation to just that piece, that prioritization, maybe like an implied irresponsibility, that is coming from a place of privilege on our own parts. And it's time to kind of like set aside that privilege, because when we talk about it through reductive, simplified manners, that can really cause a lot of shame in those who are carrying out these behaviors through a lot of times no fault of their own, right? So in kind of wrapping up this talk, I think the one thing we would all like everyone to kind of walk away with is the importance of understanding the why behind these monetary decisions, approaching others with empathy, and the understanding that unless we understand the why of the monetary decisions, we can't make progress. We can't help fix anyone's situation, and we can't help those who truly need it as a result.
I want to take a second to let that sink in, because we're going to put you guys on the spot now. And thinking about some of the things that you've heard around scarcity, around trauma, around how that has impacted us as individuals, and maybe how that may impact you internally. A lot of us here are creators, and so we're creating content on the popular social platforms, on blogs, on YouTube, on podcasts. And so when we think about lifestyle marketing, anybody use lifestyle marketing in their practice, or anybody see lifestyle marketing in their practice, that can inflict trauma onto your audience, where people see, oh, they have the shiny new car, oh, they have the shiny new watch, and so they feel that they have to get that same thing in order to feel successful or be successful. Talking about scarcity, how many people have courses, books, programs, buy now at a discounted rate? That's scarcity, and scarcity is so imbued into our culture, into the capitalist society that we live in, that it's not something that we pay attention to anymore. And so when we think about how we position our products, our services, the work that we do, our accomplishments, and put them on Front Street, right, to showcase, we have to think about the person who's consuming that content and how they're going to walk away either feeling empowered or being traumatized. And so now I want to open it up to you guys. What are some ways that trauma has manifested itself in you, if you feel comfortable sharing? What are some ways that maybe you can avoid inflicting or improve the way that maybe you inflict financial trauma onto your audiences? Because I think it's important too to note that it's not possible to completely eradicate it, right? We are a very diverse group here, and so who I'm talking to when I'm creating content might be different than who Ed's talking to when he's creating content, or Adrienne's talking to when she's creating content. And so when we're experience-based practitioners, which a lot of us are, our experiences are going to resonate with some people, but it's going to be completely foreign to others. And so I'm going to pause here and allow you guys to ask some questions. I see a hand in the back. And we appreciate you sharing that. I know it's not easy to be that transparent. And I want to piggyback onto your statement because I'm sitting up here and I have a shirt on that says, "I fired my boss," right? And so for those of you who are not familiar with my story, in May of 21, I left my employer, I fired my boss. And it was a liberating experience, to say the least. I know that a lot of the people who either follow me before that or who have heard of that story and followed me as a result of it became inspired. But I want to practice what I'm preaching up here as well. And so it's not the encouragement of people to walk away from their livelihood in sharing my story. It's me owning feeling of empowerment, being able to walk away from a toxic environment. And so I think there's been like this resonating theme that I've noticed since being here where polarity exists, right? You either have to be an entrepreneur or have to have the 9 to 5. And that was a choice that was presented to me by my direct supervisor. You gotta choose, Rahkim. And so I chose me. But that's not to say that people cannot do both. And so I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront.
Right here in front.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. This is definitely something that I've talked about in a very contained space, but it's something that I'd like to talk about more in. I think about how I met with a lovely group of financial coaches yesterday, all women, and I shared my story, but I didn't share my story. How do you get the courage to share that side? Because a big part of why I do what I do is because of the financial trauma that I went through as an abused woman and experienced financial abuse and stuff like that, but it's hard to talk about. So then I walk away from conversations like I had yesterday, not mentioning it at all, and thinking, how could you not mention that part, you know? And so I feel like, wow, you guys are talking about it, but how do you get that courage to really, like, you know, because you know it's needed, you know?
So I think I'll answer from as a therapist and then as a person. Yeah, that, wow.
You just said that.
Yes. If you were my client, right, I would say that owning our story is an ongoing process and it takes time, and so give yourself grace in not having to share your trauma story. Like I think that's the thing you can also come away from this type of panel is like, wow, they're up there, they're sharing their story, that's so powerful, what's wrong with me for not sharing my story? That's not what we're saying. You need to leave here and go unearth and dump your trauma story, because that's, I can't get the words, I'm thinking of Brene Brown in my head. She just looms real large in my head, in a good way. I don't know if anybody knows Brene Brown. Yeah. But that's trauma dumping. Where we're at in our journey is a degree of trauma resolution. And we're not sharing all of our traumatic story, any one of us. There's parts of that painful story that I'm not sharing, that Adrienne and Rahkim and Suni are not sharing intentionally. So we have a right to privacy as being people that have experienced forms of different trauma. So there's a judgment and a space there. For my own journey of being able to sit here today, it's been an 8-year unfolding. After I graduated from my master's in counseling, I've been in weekly therapy for almost 8 years. I spent 4 years in profound depression like I could never imagine. It was hell. So I was in week in, week out therapy. It was terrible. It was so hard. But I knew I had this hope that if I just stuck with it and kept working through and trying to get to the root of what's really paining me, what caused me to stop showing up, that I would find resolution. And I have, but it's been like shaving an onion. And so to say it's been 8 years in the making to sit here today. And so I'm not saying it'll be 8 years for you. It might be 2 years. It might be 12 years. Everyone's journey and how much you share and what you do with it is for you to continue to discover. And so today you took another step on shaving your onion and sharing just a little bit more here with us. Congratulations. Yes. Thank you for being part of the community.
If I can add on to that, What you shared resonated. Thank you for sharing. I know it's hard. I've done a little bit of speaking on some different podcasts, and the very first one that I spoke on was hosted by two good friends, and I didn't have the courage to share my story at all, even though they were good friends, and whatever I shared would be safe. When I finally did get around to sharing it, what I realized, first I felt like a fraud after it came out, because I was like, yeah, this is cool, but this is not fully real, this is not authentic. But the second thing that I realized was that people are scared to talk. They always are scared to talk about these topics. It feels isolating when no one talks about it, which makes it even more terrifying. If you can even just say a couple of sentences, there are other people in the room on the other end of the mic, wherever they are, that will feel supported and braver and more comfortable and less alone. So those are the two drivers for me. You asked, like, how do you talk about it? I focus on one, what is authenticity? What is true to me? I don't want to feel like a liar by lying by omission. And two, at the other end of my discomfort is the ability to help someone who is maybe on the path, or usually somewhere on the path that I once was, or is on the path that someone I cared about once was. And that really helps with tapping into whatever courage you can muster to share that fear.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions. Go ahead. Oh, either one.
Thank you for the time. One of the financial trauma that I realized I have is I was in high school, so my mom co-signed a loan for a family member. That person never paid back that loan. So my mom was the one with an unstable job to pay back. So we suffered for 2 years. So now when I get married, that was hard for me, and I would say that my husband, my family and I, we immigrate here 6 years ago from Haiti to the U.S. But for me, and I always say that I would never co-sign a loan for someone. So when we immigrate here, so going to a car dealership and co-sign a car, it was hard for me to even put my name on that paper. And then I had to realize, okay, it's not for someone else, it's for our family. That car will be used for our children. So that was a hard moment for me. But my question will be, for Ted.
Ed, yeah.
Ted, thank you. How do you deal, or what would be your advice for couple, how they deal with money fights, and when is a good time for them to hire or to seek for help? Because sometimes you cannot resolve everything by yourself. You need to seek someone. What would be
I think at that point of recognition, right? I mean, it sounds really simple, and I wish that there was a perfect formula, but if you've tried what you have within you to come together with your partner and it's been unsuccessful, then it's time to ask for help. And there's no shame in seeking marriage therapy help. If we look at our cultural history, the existence of marriage therapy has existed for like this slice of history. The study of intimate relationships is this short. So our parents have not benefited from relational science. We put people on the moon before we understood how intimate relationships worked.
That's a good point. That's actually pretty interesting.
Like if you stop and think about it, we put people on the moon before we studied how intimate relationships work and survive over the long term. So 2 of the top prolific researchers right now are Dr. John Gottman, so look him up, and Sue Johnson. There's many wonderful academics and researchers, and Rahkim, you brought up a great point. There is always this dance between the academic world and the research world and the practical lived world, and their overlap. But we know a lot about what it takes to sustain an intimate relationship and how to resolve conflict within an intimate relationship. So taking the time to get there, the research is very clear that most people in relational distress wait 7 years before they seek help. Well, could you imagine if you had diabetes and left it untreated for 7 years? Right? Relational health is one of the most vital health issues that's not talked about or addressed or treated early enough. And most of us bring relational trauma with us into our adult life. And so until we start to reconcile our relational trauma and relational trauma history, we're going to struggle in our financial life. And your example is perfect, the co-lining process, right? This is the bigger message for for us, the financial community, is many of the solutions that we're creating for people are unintentionally creating trauma for people. So when we're thinking we're helping you by creating a co-signing environment, but we're not talking to you about the relational risk of co-signing, we're setting you up for risk. So we need to be very thoughtful as a financial community about how our financial instruments may have unintended negative consequences, and to be able to talk with people effectively about that risk instead of just selling the benefits, which is what we do in business. We don't talk about the risks or the warning labels. Prescriptions are required to have a warning label. So, sorry, I went on a soapbox.
Can I add in one thing? Oh, I just want to add in one thing about that. So when you mentioned a couple things, that's another trauma I have. I have plenty of my sacred days. But before I got married, whenever I was dating and someone wanted to date me intimately, like one-on-one, like we're exclusive, all that stuff, I'll pull a credit report. Like you pull my credit report, I'll pull your credit report. And the reason why, no, I'm serious. The reason why.
I'm seeing it, yes. Yes.
Did you ask for their tax return too?
She's talking about getting financially naked, y'all. That's what we're talking about, getting financially naked. And if y'all can have sex, we're adults.
Exactly.
If y'all can have sex, you can look at each other's financial life.
And that was the exact reason. That was the reason. So I'm saying that to say a lot of people didn't date me exclusively because of this reason. But I seriously, if you wanted to be intimate with me one-on-one and we're like exclusively dating, you're saying that your credit score is worth more and me seeing your history is worth more than my body, that's a problem. To me, that's a huge problem. But that stems from a lot of traumas I have as well. But because of that, because this was my whole reason, because we got married, I'm like, hey, we decided to purchase a home, but you could probably figure out who was big on purchasing a home. So purchase our home, but the reason why I did that is because if two people buy a home together, my credit score, I worked hard for my score. I'm not gonna have my score drop because you didn't know what you were doing. Now, if you came into a situation and your score was lower than mine, that's okay. No judgment, anything like that, but we'll work together and we're gonna build each other's score up. My score wasn't ever the low one, but I'm saying for anybody that like I pulled the credit report with, but we would work together to build that up. And my whole reason behind that is you're not going to tell me that your finances are more private than my body. Like my body is my body. That's me. Like, yes, it's my temple. Exactly. So, thank you, whoever said that. But we seriously did that. And I'm saying that to say, like, one is I think that helps couples seeing that one-on-one, like seeing each other's credit report. And it's not saying finances are everything, but if you go purchase a mortgage, one person has a low score, the other person has a high score, that's an easy argument that's about to start, because now the person with the higher score is about to drop down as soon as they get that mortgage together. So that's gonna create problems. So I was trying to be, what's the word? Proactive, thank you. We're trying to be proactive instead of reactive.
Okay.
Ooh, we got some questions.
I was really scared if someone came into my DMs in a distressful state. And so I think about it a lot when I see people post about mindset and trauma, like what are the ethical implications? And if these are suggestions, like you can't control everyone, people will tell you their stories and being very open and vulnerable, like how do you be careful about providing resources, helping people through a social media platform? When I'm used to like face-to-face, I'm having a crisis, I know what to do.
Right.
Can I?
Is that for me or? Okay.
Go ahead,
You guys have heard from me.
My background's in banking, and I think a lot of people look for specific financial advice, knowing that background, and so I steer clear of giving specific financial advice, especially investment advice, because I'm not licensed. And so I think it's important to be self-aware in terms of the licenses that you do have and the licenses that you don't have around giving generic advice on a platform that could be very large, right? So Instagram, I have almost 13,000 followers. If I said, do this thing, and it doesn't fit for 98% of my followers, well, then I'm doing a disservice. And so I would say on a public platform that you should refrain from giving specific advice, and if asked for it, then it should go into a one-on-one kind of session, like an official, formal session.
And something,
Go ahead.
okay, something I've done, this is just talking about shame. So I had a post, this is the years of, probably like 2020, but I did this post. I thought it was hilarious. Obviously it wasn't, because it was actually shaming people. And it was one of those Kermit the Frog memes, you know how Kermit was doing the sipping the tea? Yeah, so it said, you can go shopping on Black Friday, but just remember, don't make sure your next Friday isn't black because you didn't pay your light bills, or something like that. And I thought it was funny. I'm like, oh, this is a good meme. Like, yeah, you go shopping on Black Friday, but you didn't pay your electricity. Like, that's a problem. But I made that post, and it was actually a learning lesson for me because someone actually said, how are you going to tell me what to do with my money? Who are you? And I'm like, well, who are you? I'm not trying to tell you what to do with your money. I just thought the post was funny. But it inflicted trauma on somebody because that person actually had where their lights were shut off one time, and they didn't realize like they were spending money. We ended up working together, so the person became a client from all that. But the problem was they didn't realize like they were spending because they had emotional ties to their finances. So they would spend money for enjoyment, but then didn't pay their electricity bill. Like obviously that's a huge problem, but we have to deal with the mindset. But I was saying that to say like just be aware of like what you're posting, because even though I still think that meme was funny, I think it's hilarious. But for a lot of people, it inflicted some trauma onto them, and it made them feel shameful, like, oh, I've had a Black Friday where my lights were shut off. And that wasn't the intent behind it. I just thought the thing was funny.
Well, and that's the difficult thing, right? I think sarcasm can often hit a nerve in a really painful way that empathy and compassion can open up softly and kindly. Mm-hmm. And that's that difficult thing is in society we use sarcasm a lot to address things that are uncomfortable because it makes it a little easier. But for those that are stuck in that position, it evokes shame for them. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's just, I think the bigger message is as creators, we just have to be open to continually evolving and knowing where are those resources that we can point people when they slide into our DM and they're asking for something and they go super specific. You either say, if you're a qualified professional, then like, let's talk about this in a qualified professional context, or here's where you can go, the National Mental Health Association, or, God, why am I blanking on? I can't even think of. Which one? NAMI, that was it. Thank you for reading my mind. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental.
That's not me. It's me.
Okay.
It's Saturday morning, y'all. I'm losing my acronyms.
So I do apologize.
Okay.
We're out of time, but if someone wants to make a comment, but we are like.
Yeah, we'll
take
hang
a
out
comment.
so you guys can
We'll go
come.
in the hallway
we'll be
because
out
we're
there.
getting the hook.
So-
So
Yeah.
we'll be in the
Sorry,
hallway.
we're getting cold at the end. But thank you so much.